Get on the train before it leaves the station. The truth train is coming, gonna run them down.
Well, tonight, conviction vacated, new trial granted. That's George Powell's reality after spending 10 years behind bars for a crime he says he didn't commit. We were the first to break this news to you on our Channel 6 app this morning. Channel 6's Imani Payne has been closely following this very controversial case for the past 3 years. She joins us now with tonight's top story. Hi, Imani.
Chris, it is a bombshell revelation. George could be out of his prison cell as early as next week, and he doesn't even know it yet. George Powell has served 10 years of a 28-year sentence for armed robbery. He's always maintained his innocence, and now the highest court in the state says George will have another chance to prove it. In 2009, George was convicted of armed robbery of a Killeen 7-Eleven. False testimony from a jailhouse informant helped put him away, but it's also what is helping his case now. This morning, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals ruled there was misconduct on the state's part during George's trial in relation to that testimony that prevented him from having a fair trial. They said in part, the informant's testimony at trial that he had not made any deal in exchange for his testimony and was only testifying because it was the right thing to do was false, and the state failed to correct such testimony. I spoke to both Powell's attorney at the Innocence Project and Powell's fiance, who has long been a part of this journey. Here's what his attorney had to say.
These words, but this is what it comes down to. The prosecutors cheated and lied in order to convict an innocent man. And so he is entitled to a new trial.
The court did not make a decision on Powell's claim that he is innocent. The Court of Appeals decision comes after Bell County Judge John Gaunt sent them a recommendation saying that George should be granted a new trial. And today, we know they have followed that recommendation. Since Powell is no longer convicted of anything, his lawyer says he should be moved back to the Bell County Jail within the next week or so. They will then work on getting bail set. Hear from George's fiance, who has been a critical part of his case. The DA is also speaking out, and George's attorney is responding to that. Those details coming up tonight at 6. Chris.
Yeah, we know you've been covering this case for a long time, Imani. That is a bombshell tonight. Thank you so much.
George Powell has served 10 years of a 28-year sentence for armed robbery. He's always maintained his innocence, and now the highest court in the state says George will have another chance to prove it.
How do I stay sane? You don't.
Life behind these walls has been a challenge for George Powell. He spent more than a decade behind bars convicted of armed robbery, but spends his days trying to prove his innocence, and now he's finally getting another shot.
This is really happening. I'm really in prison for something I did not have anything to do with.
In 2009, George was convicted of armed robbery of a Killeen 7-Eleven. False testimony from a jailhouse informant helped put him away, but it's also what is helping his case now. This morning, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals ruled there was misconduct on the state's part during George's trial in relation to that testimony that prevented him from having a fair trial, saying in part, the trial court finds that Smith's testimony at trial that he had not made any kind of deal in exchange for his testimony, had not asked for anything, did not hope for any kind of credit, and was testifying only because he wanted to do the right thing, was false, and that the state failed to correct such testimony, leading to George's conviction to be vacated and a new trial granted. This after George's attorney, Mike Ware, the executive director of the Innocence Project of Texas, picked up the case and applied the pressure.
This is what it comes down to. The prosecutors cheated and lied in order to convict an innocent man. And so he is entitled to a new trial, and we're confident that in a fair trial where the prosecutors don't cheat and lie, Mr. Powell will be acquitted.
George's fiancée, Tamara Parsons, helped George obtain his new legal team at the Innocence Project, and she's been fighting for his freedom for 6 years. She says she never gave up hope that one day he may return home.
Oh, I think he's going to be as ecstatic as I am right now. He wants to start a business. It's been 6 years now for me, and that's a long time to be waiting and hoping, and it's a good day.
But they just kept pointing us towards George.
All of this coming just 48 hours before a Netflix series covering George's case premieres to 150 million subscribers around the world. It focuses on junk science and how it can lead to wrongful convictions. In George's case, an eyewitness described the robber as 5'6". George, however, is 6'3". The major height discrepancies and questionable forensic video analysis catching the eye of Netflix and also proved to be major focal points during Ware's arguments. Since Powell is no longer convicted of anything, his lawyer says he should be moved back to the Bell County Jail within the next week or so. They will then work on getting bail set, while George continues to profess his innocence.
I'm absolutely 100% innocent.
We asked Bell County District Attorney Henry Garza if he really is going to try George's case for a second time. He says yes, that is the plan. In response to that, George's attorney Mike Ware says he wonders if it will be fair this time around and says if the DA's office doesn't recuse itself from the case, the defense will file a motion to do so. Ware also says they will file a motion for reconsideration of the actual innocence claims within the next 15 days. His conviction has been vacated and he's been granted a new trial after serving more than 10 years behind bars for a crime he says he didn't commit. And tonight, in an exclusive interview, George Powell is speaking out about it all. George Powell taking in a moment he wasn't sure he'd ever see. Another shot at his freedom.
Because they incarcerated me illegally to try to keep me quiet. And as I fought for my life, they were heartless. They meaning Bell County District Attorney Henry Garza.
More than a decade behind bars for something he says he didn't do. George focuses on music to stay sane.
My whole life, I've been living for this moment. Everything I've been through, the reason I was chosen.
George was convicted of robbing a Killeen 7-Eleven in 2009 and sentenced to 28 years. False testimony from a jailhouse informant who thought he would get a deal from the state if he testified helped put George away. This week, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals said there was misconduct on the state's part in regards to that testimony, which prevented George from having a fair trial. So they vacated his conviction and granted him a new trial. George heard the news on a prison radio. The normally outspoken man can't find the words to describe this moment. What are you feeling right now?
I'm just ready. These ain't tears of sorrow. They're tears of, I'm holding.
It's hard for him to convey his range of emotions. He's disappointed the Court of Appeals didn't recognize his actual innocence claims, which he says leaves him with no compensation from the state for what he calls a wrongful conviction.
They have just taken 11 years from my life, and now they're setting me free, and I don't have nothing to fall on. I'm penniless. Plus, they took my youth from me.
But he's grateful for this second shot to clear his name and once again become a free man. He held back tears as he thought about being able to just see and feel a day start and end and start again.
Okay, these pictures are my sunrises and my sunsets. A lot of time in here, we don't get to see the sunrise and we don't get to see the sunset because there's no windows. So this is what I look at when I want to see it rise and I want to see it set. Visualizing the day that I get out and I get to embrace an actual sunrise and an actual sunset that first 24 hours.
Major height discrepancy is leading George's innocence claim. All of this news coming as a documentary focused on George and his case premiered on Netflix today to 150 million subscribers. It focuses on junk science and how that can lead to wrongful convictions. In George's case, an eyewitness put the robber at 5'6". George, however, is 6'3". He wouldn't go into detail, but says his legal team at the Innocence Project is strategizing for this new trial to make sure George never ends up back in here again.
There's only one thing that needs to happen to prove that's not me in that video. There's only one thing that needs to happen. And when that happens, there's going to be no way to refute it.
George says he believes he will be free again.
And when that happens, plans to start a movement focused on music, positivity, supporting the wrongfully convicted, and helping reform the criminal justice system. And after that, he plans to head to the recording studio to lay down the thousands of songs he's written from behind bars, sharing them with the people in the streets once again, from sunrise till sunset.
Since Powell is no longer convicted of anything, his lawyer says he should be moved back to the Bell County Jail within the next week or so. They will then work on getting bail set. For much more from George's interview and details on this development, head to KCENTV.com.